Gary F. Bengier, and I'm a writer, and my book is published by my imprint, Kellen Press. But what happens when there are so few jobs around? And what's the world like then? And how do we find purpose in that kind of world, right? That's going to be one of the great challenges for humankind.
Hey, it's Kellen, and today on Diversified Game, you guys ready to go into the future? Gary F. Bengier, he's going to take us there, and he's going to talk about his latest book, and the links will be in the description box, as well as, to his website. So if you want to contact him to get on that ship into the future, he might have the Back to the Future machine. He's going to tell us. But Gary, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Well, Kellen, I'm doing great, and thank you very much for inviting me here to talk with you and your audience today. I'm just delighted to talk about my book, Unfettered Journey, and peek into the future.
Definitely. Let's just get right into the book and talk about, what is it about and, why you wrote it. Okay,
well, it's a cross-genre novel that's set in the near future, 140 years in the future. And the quick summary is that it's about an AI scientist named Joe who's seeking to create true robot consciousness. And on his quest to find that, he comes in contact with a mysterious woman who's on a personal mission of social justice. And the story goes from there. I'll just say that. And I think a key thing is that it's a hard science view of the future, a reality that we can really believe is highly likely, I think. And that and the social justice theme, I think, are very important.
Okay, you say highly likely. So this, I know from doing research, this isn't one of the, cyborgs are taking over. You get dinged every time you say a bad word on the street. I'm thinking of so many different movies that the future.
Well, you are exactly right. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, a lot of people about the future, they think about, Star Trek, Star Wars, the Terminator, there's the Matrix. They're thinking about, I would submit, fairly unbelievable futures. They may be great stories, but quite honestly, I think they do us a disservice because it gives the average person a wrong idea what's most likely to happen. For example, if you wrote a book 15 years ago, a lot of sci-fi writers probably missed the iPhone, right? That was invented in 2007. So you could imagine a story that didn't have the idea that you could carry this stuff around in your pocket, right? And talk to everyone in the world and have the internet and the phone knew where you were, right? I mean, imagine, that's so hard to imagine. So why is that? Well, I think it's hard to accurately imagine the future. You have to know a lot about a bunch of technologies to kind of get it more or less right. So a lot of writers kind of give up. It's easier to talk about dragons or, faster than light speed spaceships, and it sounds pretty cool, but it's just not going to happen, right? So I think it's important to imagine the future in a realistic way because it's complicated already with our technology, and it's going to get more complicated. And I think that this next century will be one of the most difficult and interesting for humankind to traverse, to get to the other side of a century and a half. Really, really fundamental changes for humanity. And if we can't imagine it in a relatively realistic way, then we're going to have a harder time getting to where we really need to be.
Well, so I think I'm still in the 23rd century due to Star Trek, and I'm waiting to be, teleported and beam me up. Because what do you think? What do you think about that? Because I know Trekkies would be like, "Hold on, we never thought we'd have these little pocket things, and it would be tracking us everywhere." I'm sure you hear that all the time.
Yeah, well, there's the science. The interesting thing is the science has narrowed down what we know and what we don't know. And the error bars, as they talk about in science, have gotten smaller. So we do know it's you just can't go faster than the speed of light, which means that these ideas that we will be exploring distant planets around distant stars, anytime soon is just crazy. And in fact, I suspect, as an example, within in the next 20 or 30 years, with the space telescopes, we're going to discover a really important fact. The question is, are there any exoplanets that are more or less habitable within any reasonable distance, 10 light years away from Earth, right? And if the answer is there aren't, then that's really sad for us because, to accelerate a spaceship to a tenthfold the speed of light, if you did that, it would take you 97 years to accelerate, get to an exoplanet 5 light years away, and slow down enough to actually go into orbit. A century, right? I mean, imagine that. That's a close one. So I hope the answer is yes, there are some, so we can dream for the next few centuries after that. But that's now, think of how much of the sci-fi that we now have grown up with that just will be kind of sad. It will never not be possible. So.
Well, what do you think about, let's talk about the near future, especially with, lockdowns and how things with education. You have a, business degree from Harvard. Do you think Harvard, the Yales, the Princetons, all the Ivy Leagues, even where one of the schools I went to, the Harvard of the South, I call it, Grambling State University in North Louisiana, of all places.
Good football school.
Definitely. Do you think that the future of school in the next, 5 to 10 years will change, and will Harvard and the Oxfords be what they have always been?
I think that education will change. I think that these institutions have a lot of intellectual property, IP, figuring out how to do things, and they've enough smart people to figure out how to turn, and they've got enough resources to invest in making those changes. So those things tend to change slowly. And in terms of how we educate ourselves, I've got a thing in the book where, there's two mathematicians talking, and they're standing there in the room with these little icons floating around holographically. And they're talking about how you can visualize the math, but one says to the other, but you still have to do the hard work of doing the problem sets, because we're not going to be able to upload this information into our brains or anything like that. I mean, if you look at how the brain is structured and what we know about how we learn, this is just not going to happen. I'm afraid it's not going to be easy like that.
You're crushing folks' dreams, because there's folks who are just waiting to take the pill so they can start speaking English, French, Swahili, and every other language while they travel the world the same way you do. So, yes. What are you seeing as far as, we in America, in certain, in Japan, certain places, tech is just real big, but you go even off the beaten path. And if everything was perfect here, nirvana, AI, automation, the same way the future is faster than you think, in that book is telling us, everything is, 3D printing in 24 hours like they do in Guatemala right now. Do you see the rest of the world catching up to what we're in America in the next, 10 to 15 years? Or are we still going to have those rural places?
Oh, I think it's going to take a long time. And so, I mean, here's what I think that for this next century, the two most important technologies affecting humanity are bioscience, and we're seeing it with things like CRISPR-Cas9 developing these vaccines in record time. And the second one, and the one I focus on in my book, is AI and robotics. Okay, so let me focus on AI and robotics, because I think that gives you a sense of the change. We see automation in factories already, right? It's happening, it's taking jobs away. I think there was one of the major global consulting companies, I think it was McKinsey, that said something like by 2050, we'll have 70% of the jobs will be automated. So I don't believe that. I th- and also I'll say that if you look at things like the Boston Dynamics robots, have you seen the robot dogs? Or just for New Year's they had the dancing robots, which are so cool, right? So we look at that and go, wow, these robots are going to be here tomorrow. But again, I don't think so. I think it's going to be more akin to the automobile development, right? You had Henry Ford developing an automobile, in 1910 or something, and but then it took a long time to get windshield wipers and automatic starters and electrical systems and building all these roads and the legal structure to deal with what happens when cars hurt people and all of that. It just took a long time. So you think about robots, um, I think it's highly likely that they're going to continue to get better and better and better, but it's not going to be overnight. Okay. But the other part of that is that I do believe they will get better and better. And they're probably going to be about our size because, we have trillions of dollars of infrastructure that's built for human size, right? So they'll probably walk around like us, right? So now think about what that does with automation and jobs. And that's a key point. It's hard to automate stuff, but they'll keep on working and working and working over the years. And, they'll make the robots that can see and they can be, more nimble, and it'll get better and better and jobs will go away. About a year and a half ago, I went down to a conference at the Santa Fe Institute talking about AI and the barrier of meaning. And one of the guys presenting talked about job loss, and he described it as sort of a topology with hills and mountains and valleys, and the water level was rising. And the water level rising is the jobs disappearing, right? The land's disappearing. So, at the top of those hills, there'll be some jobs that'll be there last, right? Maybe talk radio person like yourself, maybe strategist. But I suggest that one of the jobs at the top of the hill is roofer. The guy that climbs up on the roof with the shingles and all that stuff. Well, that's a job that, they won't get around to automating that for a long time because it's too hard. You got to balance that stuff. You got to do all this physical stuff. So the roofers at some point will be paid a lot of money, okay? But eventually they'll automate with the robot doing the roofer's job. And when that happens, think about it. It's all over. It's all over when that happens, when the robots are walking around. At that point, we have all these robots, but we have no jobs really, or we have different jobs, way different jobs. So just imagine that future, which I suggest is highly likely, right? I mean, I'm saying 140 years, okay? So here's the other thing that happens with that from an economic point of view. Right now we think about the economy based upon labor. Everyone talks about labor efficiency, and that kind of makes sense, the way the capitalist system works. If you get more efficient per person, then there's more stuff per person. If it was just all handed out in some equal way, that would be good, right? But once you have robots, think about it. When you have robots that are mining the ores and smelting the steel and building the factories, and then when the robots are building the assembly plants that build the robots, when robots are building robots, well, then you, Coleman, could have 20 robots doing stuff for you, right? Because it's not really limited by the number of robots that robots can make, right? And as soon as that happens, it's totally divorced from our individual labor. You could have a gazillion amount of stuff, right? It's crazy, right? But so I'm suggesting that too is highly likely, which is a very different world than today, right? It's a world where we have a lot of stuff. So, if you just take economic models and you look at the GDP of the US and the world, it's been growing something between 1 and 4 or 5% a year. I mean, China's growing like 10% a year. If you just take the median of that number over the next 140 years, then simple math, my calculations say we will have something between 10 and 20 times as much stuff per person before we even calculate the robots making robot stuff into the equation. So a lot of stuff, but no jobs.
Definitely. We know robots, can't get it right. I remember when the Roomba first came out, early 2000s, and going to grab that and returning it very quickly, saying, hey, this does not replace good old fashioned, vacuum cleaning. And, if you guys have a house cleaner, I know now with kids, I surely did, but back then I didn't. I was just being lazy and trying to be fancy. But where can, purpose, I know you talk about that a lot. Once, all these things can be done, or even half of them with automation, how do we then go find our purpose?
Oh, that is an excellent question. Yeah, because a lot of us find purpose in working, right? And competition and all that sort of thing. But what happens when there are so few jobs around? And, what's the world like then? And how do we find purpose in that kind of world, right? That's going to be one of the great challenges for humankind. What do we do, right? And
tell us, because you're at a place in life, you've been successful, Silicon Valley, you're able to kind of pick and choose what you want to do. Now you're probably finding purpose, traveling and probably giving back, which, you know what, I spoiled one of my golden questions. What is your community give back? While you give us that, how do we find that purpose? What is a community give back that you do? Just because my listeners will say, hey, you didn't ask the question. So, give us the purpose and, the community give back, please.
Oh, well, okay. I'll just briefly answer that one. My wife and I, we spend a lot of time with the mission of helping less advantaged kids find their own success. And that's a lot with scholarships, a lot with teaching resilience and that sort of thing. We really focus on underserved communities in particular with that. So, among the organizations we've been directly involved with in the last 20 years include organizations like Summer Research that send kids off on summer programs and get them into colleges, and a lot of first in their families going to college and that sort of thing. I'm the first in my family to go to college, and I have a great respect for people who are willing to work and get ahead, even if they don't have all the advantages in life. So that's what we like to do. That's the answer to that question.
Awesome.
Yeah. So let me mention. I said I want to talk about social justice, and that's a big theme in the book. If you imagine this world that I just described, which I will suggest is highly likely, okay, at some point, highly likely. So the book takes place in the year 2161. So when robots are making robots and we've got lots of stuff, who owns the robots? Right?
Yeah, that's the question.
I think it's a really important question, because if there are a few jobs and only certain people own the robots, then they have it all. And then the question is, what does everyone else have? So I don't see that as a stable situation, right? It's an unstable equilibrium from a mathematics point of view. And so the sort of conceit in my book is that the U.S. being a property rights driven country, right, and maybe more into property rights and less prone to egalitarian solutions. So what happens is, when this comes to a point about who owns the robot factories, there's a point where after the climate wars, okay, where we're fighting over scarce land resources and water resources and everything else in the world. In the US, the answer is that they nationalize all the robot factories, okay? But the quid pro quo for that, from the oligarchs who have to give that up, the quid pro quo is that when they introduce a series of laws called the Levels Acts, where everyone is assigned a level from 1 at the top to 99 at the bottom. So you're assigned a level, And supposedly these are, going to be merit based, and you can move up and down in the levels based on merit. But and these levels acts restrain somewhat what you can do. Who can travel, who can marry whom, and certain other kinds of opportunities. And so there's some suspicion that the levels acts are less based on merit than they are on, legacy. That's the social justice thing at the heart of the book. And as I mentioned, there's a mysterious woman who's fighting for social justice. So that's the book. That's the key message in the book about these levels acts. Now I have to tell you, this idea was very, very central to my thinking for several years. And the book just was released in last September, and fortuitously, the Black Lives Matter movement happened just last year. So that's just an accident. But
well, do you think that the robots would have then the capability to, treat everybody equal with the opportunities? And then to make it even more confusing, let's say the robots are tied into Facebook, Twitter, and they have, their thinking, but you have someone who has all totally different thinking, whether they are a Trump supporter or from, like me, the school of George Carlin of, hey, I don't believe any of these politicians because they'll all sell us out, but I want to say that, where the robot will say, can't say that, can't put, and now you're kind of debating with your robot. And that, on Facebook, the thing is, that's their platform. They get to choose. But then do they get to, people say they're so big, it's like they're too big to fail. So how do we get everybody in the same box? Because that's going to be difficult. And I don't know if that'll be interesting, because I kind of like the debates. I like watching them. Trump was entertaining to me, and the political debates, again, George Carlin would tell us, these folks, and I've worked with them and for them, they don't care about anybody but their bottom line, 99% of them, in my humble opinion. So how do we get, the tech to match up with all of our multifaceted type of thinking?
Yeah. So, well, I have a different concept of how the robots fit into the equation. Because as I said, the main character, Joe, is an AI scientist who's trying to create true robot consciousness. And, what is consciousness itself, right? And by the way, one of the things I did after I finished up my 30 years in a business career, and I could have time for passion projects, is I actually went back to school. I went back and backfilled an astrophysics undergraduate degree, and then I started studying some philosophy, and I backfilled an undergraduate philosophy degree, and then I got a master's in philosophy, and so I was spending a lot of time on theory of mind, and what is the mind, right? What is that I that's you right there? What's that at the center of you? What is that I, right? What is that thing? And so that kind of thinking, which I spent a decade plus just thinking about that problem, that's one of the things that informs the book about robots. And so, can you create true robo consciousness? And the book might suggest that no, it's kind of hard. It's really hard because we don't even know what it is for ourselves, right? So quite honestly, the robots in the book, well, I leave the question open. Can they really be conscious? And you have to read the book to see where I come out on that. But the robots can be a little bit annoying. And actually, I think you made a point earlier about robots. I think they will be annoying for a long time. They just won't figure us out. They'll be getting in our way. They'll be talking at us too much, and we're going, just shut up, give us a little break here. They'll be asking us silly questions, and So I think it's the future is us, working with our technology and being more annoyed by it for the next century. But I think it's all about people working with people, actually. And I think that it's not going to get any slower. We're going to have all these distractions, and how are we going to find mental space and mental peace in there? I mean, okay, I mean, let's just take the social media that we're engaged in now. We've got our cell phones and we're constantly engaged, right? Well, what's that cell phone look like in the future? Let's just think about that. 140 years, I mean, clearly, what's it going to be like? Yes, exactly. You pointed to your ear. I agree. I mean, so in Unfettered Journey, there's a chip that's inserted behind your left ear, kind of up there. And then you can imagine, well, what's the screen look like? Well, it's, you got a corneal implant in the corner of your eye, and, it's some future Bluetooth connected, and you just kind of talk to it like you might do to Siri, but, it's Siri 15.0, and you just say, you say you're sitting there in Florida, and you say, where's the closest, this kind of restaurant? And up pops on your eye a little map, and it says, oh, that one looks good. Okay, show me the way. And on your cornea, on the little map, is an augmented reality map overlay that you just walk and follow the little red line, right? So, I mean, can you imagine that that's how it's going to be, right? I mean,
okay, you're going to think I'm a little crazy, but that's okay. I truly think, and I've proved it to myself, and I almost have my wife there who, she's in medicine, and she's like, okay, I hear you, but I truly think that phone, I don't have Alexa or anything, but, we have Bixby, and, you have the Siri. I think that thing can read my mind, because there are times I will open my thing, and it's something I'm thinking, and I will want to put just how, and it will say what I was thinking. I'm putting how. Now I know about pixels and how, this can follow you from the phone to the computer, but I'm not doing that. I'm just having an issue of, how far is a certain restaurant, and I'm just thinking it. And I'm like, wait, hold on. I know I have like 300 plus apps on this crazy thing, but I'm like, this thing can read my mind. I'm not crazy. And I've watched enough of the black and white Twilight Zones to know, the technology is really here, and we have to kind of just roll with it. But I also watch Black Mirror, which that actually scares me, some of those episodes. So, I mean, do you think that these phones will, when everything you've said, will be able to read our mind where we don't even have to type it in, where it's like, okay, and it just shows us?
Well, okay, 140 years, I won't say no. I mean, Elon Musk was just demonstrating the Neuralink, right? It's about, they insert a little thing about the size of a nickel in the top of your head, and they're trying to connect it to read your brainwaves. Yeah, we'll do some of that. In my book, Unfettered Journey, I do have this conceit that, you mostly talk to it, right? But if you get on an airplane, since the social protocol is you don't talk out loud because it's rude. You sort of, when you're a kid, you've learned 100 keywords that you can think, and the device can pick those up. So you can think these keywords, and the device will know what you're thinking. So it's still pretty primitive. I think it's going to be slow. The human body has spent 1 million years evolving to do what it does, right? A big part, the biggest part of our brain is the V1, which is the visual sensing part of your brain. That's larger than a cat's brain alone, just that. So we're tied into vision and hearing, and those move at a really slow speed, 30 hertz or something. It's billions of times slower than computers. So the human computer interface is really hard to do efficiently. It's going to be really efficient just to talk to the darn thing. So this whole cyborg stuff, I think it's just overblown. I don't think it's going to be very practical. But then back to what you suggested when you said it knows what I'm thinking. Yeah, that's because of the power of hundreds of billions of instances, and in these big databases, the computers can find correlations across 1 billion dimensions, right? I mean, we can think in 3 or 4 dimensions. That's it. So I mean, as an example, right now, radiology. Radiology, they've got programs like Watson that IBM is developing, and the AIs can actually read X-rays better than the experts who've been doing it for 30 years. And so what they've been testing this with is, they'll have the machine read an X-ray, and the machine says, looks like, this person's got this suspicious growth here. And, the expert missed it, and they go, okay, let's go double check that. And sure enough, they're right, which is crazy. And no one can tell you how the black box knows that, right? That's kind of weird. How do we deal with that? I mean, here's the president of the Santa Fe Institute. He had this interesting thought about this. He said, and I'll make up the example. Imagine that a woman goes in, the AI reads the test and says, "I'm really sorry, but you're going to have breast cancer unless you have a mastectomy," right? And you ask the AI, "How do you know?" And it can't answer you because it can't explain those billion dimensions. So my friend David Krakauer said, well, in that case, it almost becomes an oracle. It's no longer science, because science, you have a hypothesis, you got to explain the logic of how you got to the conclusion. But what happens when the machine kind of knows, but do we just trust it? Okay, so that's really hard. So that's sort of crazy stuff I think will happen. The AIs will seem amazing, but will they be like us? Will they be conscious?
Well, that's a conversation I've actually had. My wife is a radiologist, and she's even gone back to her home country in Cameroon, and to see how radiology works there, and has worked there. And took a month off to do that. And she's like, you know what? Sure, Kellen. Robots can read faster, but it's the other stuff that we do that they're not able to do now. So sure, read all of them until you get to that problem that, I bet 50% will have to come back to us, because if we miss one thing, we possibly could be sued. But more importantly, somebody could die.
Yes.
And so you need that human touch, because there's physicians who go out and say, hey, I've seen this 100 times, you got that, and they're totally wrong because they've seen it 100 times, but they didn't see what was behind that. So it causes bigger problems. That's what the computers won't be able to do, especially anytime soon. But I like to live in the fantasy land. Plus, again, I like to have those debates because they make it makes good time, just purposeful time, just trying to learn and find out what we know and what we don't know. What do you think got you here? Is it the always knowing, you being a first generation graduate, nobody gave this to you? Were you like the problem child where you just asked too many questions as a kid, and so you're like, I have to be like a forever student and then write about it? Like, what got you here? What was the driving purpose?
Geez, that's a really hard question. I don't know. I just think there's an urge in all of us to excel at and find out what we're good at. And, I could figure stuff out at fairly early age, and then sort of learned hard work. When I was a kid, we had moved to a house when I was, first grade, and there was an acre of land to clear, and we didn't have the money to do the landscaping, so my father cut down all these trees with a chainsaw, right? So there's lots of trees, and my job then was to cut out the stumps. And so I was wielding a two-bitted axe when I was about 7, and I had to do so many stumps a night. And it was really hard. So, and maybe that taught me that it was probably a good idea not to have to do manual labor all my life, and I would rather use my head than my arms. But
okay, that could definitely do it. That sometimes there's like that driving force. Somebody's called a name that they don't like, or they're told they can't do something. So they say, forget you, I'm going to do it and just watch. And so that could clearly be that, not wanting to be broke is a lot of people's, driving force to even leave this country, because they're like, hey, I got enough money to be a king in a lot of different countries. So yeah, I just like to know that why that spark, if you know it. That will be in the next book, you guys.
Yeah. and maybe that informs, actually, you mentioned that interesting example. That informs certainly my woman character, who I'm very, very proud about. She's just this fabulous character that has that sort of resilience. And, it's, anyway, I love my characters. I think I mentioned this, an action adventure book. It's a love story. So it's very much a cross genre book that, as I said, starts with hard science. One of my objectives was to give people a real, likely view of the future, so we can think about the real problems. I think social justice informs it because, we hope that we've solved a lot of the issues that we have today, right? 140 years, God help us, we better have gotten past racism and racial injustice. So I'm an idealist. I firmly believe that will happen. But let me ask you, do you think even in 140 years, do you think we'll all be sitting around the fire singing Kumbaya?
No, there'll be no Kumbaya. And you know that even when you go to, I know you've been to South Africa and you have, 12 different official languages, Sabona, South Africa, but you have so many, different issues from, even who rides on the big bus and who rides on the combi for a much different discount. And wherever you go in the world, I mean, you find these issues even when you go to Malta and you're like, hey, the Maltese put up with the, British, but they really don't like y'all too much, because you come over and kind of have colonized their heaven. And so, no, I don't think there'll be a Kumbaya moment, but we can, like Seth Godwin always talks about, find our tribe, find our pocket, and try as best to work within that. And you can always give back to whomever, but my tribe doesn't always look like me. They sometimes don't even have, sometimes they have a lot more money than me. They have a lot more knowledge than me, because I want to learn something rather than, always having to feed people. So no, I don't think there'll be a Kumbaya moment. Do you?
Yeah. No. And that's why that there's this central theme about these levels, right? I mean, I think one of the things that speculative fiction does is that it gives us a mirror on our own time, even if it seems like it's writing about the future. And here's a question. Do we have levels today?
There's too many levels to count, depending on even where you're at. Going back to South Africa, I remember going there pre-World Cup and friends of mine saying, I can't go in that bar, Kellen, you can. And the same situation happened when I went to Kenya last year. Hey, can I use the bathroom, you think, on the street downtown? Kellen, you're an American. You can do whatever you want here. And so there's levels just with that. And you have to be, you have to realize that and have them work for your advantage, but also be able to bring other people in and say, well, you're going into the bar with me since I'm just a crazy American in this foreign country, and they're not going to give us a problem. So there's definitely levels, and folks have to get the book. You have to get the book, folks. I'm blessed enough where the publicist is sending me the book. Was hoping to have it prior, but it's okay because I love this stuff. And I think my last question, because I don't want to give the folks a game overload. Sometimes people get scared about the future, but do you plan for this to maybe go into film?
Well, you never know about Hollywood. That's just such a casino to see if you get in there. So no, I'm just happy to get these ideas out in as many minds as possible. But I think it's this is not a world that is dystopian or utopian. It's some mix, kind of like today is. I think it's dealing with humans and the way we are, and how do we make ourselves better, and how do we move forward together. You mentioned finding your tribe. The book talks about compassion and how do you have a wider circle of concern beyond just your immediate family and the immediate people that are like you, but how do you have a larger circle of concern? And I like to get those ideas out. So in fact, I just had my French translation released a week ago. And I've got a number of other languages coming out, Italian and Japanese and a whole list of them. So I'm looking to get the book out around the world now. And it's doing pretty well for an indie book. I briefly hit 10 bestseller lists on Amazon in January. But it goes up and down. That's the competitive book market, and I'm just an individual guy trying to figure out how that works. So, but my purpose is to get the book out there and get people to think about and talk about these ideas, because this is a challenging century, and these are complicated issues to work through. And I think if we all work together, we can build a better future for us and our great grandkids.
We definitely can't make it any worse. This is great stuff. I just sent you something on LinkedIn on a conference. I think you'd be great just to, show up, called NAPTI. And it's the one I'm talking about is the one in Miami every year, but it's where the TV people, they need to hear your story, and it's a great thing. And also MIP that's in France. So it'd be a reason for you to leave the country once this whole COVID thing clears out. Because, great stories, we know Hollywood needs them because they're starting to repeat the same stuff. And it's like, I don't want to see the Wonder Years reboot, nor do I want to see the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air reboot. I don't. I like what I saw. I like my kids seeing the old one. This new one will be in a world I may not even understand. And like, hold on, that's not what Will Smith would have said back then. And so I definitely want the folks, check the links in the description, you guys. You guys are going to be blessed. We're going to take the conversation offline. Like, share, subscribe. Gary, I thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm going to check out that link. Really appreciate it. And you can get Unfettered Journey wherever you get books.